Welcome back to the CyberVault. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Logan Havern. Logan is a visionary CEO and founder of the company called Datalogz. In this episode, we're going to be covering how Logan's team is pioneering the BI ops category and what it's looking like to pivot into different markets as technology rapidly evolves. Logan, great to have you on. Thank you for joining me here today. I'll give you the opportunity to give us a little bit more of an introduction to yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks very much for having me today. So I'm Logan. I am the founder and CEO here at Datalogz. I started the company, I guess, about 4.5 years ago. But prior to that, was working at a major US airline in analytics, business intelligence, and data. And there I saw kind of firsthand the different problems that happen at scale when you're managing data across multiple platforms, thousands of users for hundreds of different business use cases. So I decided to build a platform to start solving some of these issues. And that was kind of the origin of Datalogz. But I guess 4.5 years later, we've grown to the team close to 30 people, have been through a few rounds of venture funding, and really focused on selling to the largest enterprises in the world. Our customers are really Fortune 2000s, doing some stuff in the US public sector as well. But yeah, that's kind of a quick overview about myself and the company. I'm sure we'll get into more in a minute.
Absolutely, we will. And what a great intro. And I think kind of Logan, really exciting. I think where I want to start unpacking because you obviously you've really identified a gap in the market. And I think kind of what's even more exciting and I suppose what makes your product and your offering so relevant is the fact that it's actually from real life kind of application experience. It's something that you've identified, like you said, while you were in a role. And I think we could kickstart with how did you kind of go from being able to see this information, this data, and recognize actually there's a gap here, there's an opportunity for me to create something that's going to solve this problem? What led you to kind of start foundations of Datalogz?
That's a great question. And I guess the best way to answer that is probably just tell you a little bit more about the origin story of the company and how we actually got started. It was, I'd say, a long journey over the first few years to really, I'd say, prove out product market fit and where we sit and the problem we solve. But yeah, the origin story. So I was working at this airline and we had just moved all of our on-premise data warehouses, so think like Microsoft SQL Server, over to the cloud. So using tools like Snowflake and Databricks, and I'd say like the more modern kind of data warehousing and data lake tools out there. And things were great at first. We were like the most data literate we'd ever been as a company. We went from having dozens of reports being created and dashboards and data products to having hundreds every single month. And this was great at first, but then it became this kind of management headache of, okay, why do we have the same report duplicated so many times? We have things going unused. Are we able to track if someone takes a Excel file, uploads that into the BI world? What if someone else exports that? And now you have data loss. And there's no point solution on the market to start solving these different problems. And at the time, I was trying to solve a lot of it manually. There was a point where I was like basically locked in a conference room, emailing different users one by one. Hey, go delete this data asset. It doesn't meet best practices. Where we already had a report for this. Sorry that you spent 6 months building your own version, but it doesn't match our enterprise source of truth. So I decided I'm going to build like a very simple MVP version to start solving some of these problems. And I started posting about it on different Reddit threads in the analytics and BI community. So like the Power BI Reddit thread, the Tableau Reddit thread. And one of the posts that I made just kind of talking about the solution, I say like went mini viral in one of these groups where it got like over 100 people commenting like, hey, I want to test this out and try it. So I made like a little Google form and shared this application that I kind of hacked together in my spare time. And yeah, I thought it was gonna be like an overnight success and people are all excited signing up, but basically everyone signed up and within like a few minutes churned or didn't actually connect data sources to the platform. But through that initial experience, like we got a ton of early feedback of what's valuable, what's not, what was useful. And people on Reddit are really honest because it's through an anonymous username. So I'd say like that critical, harsh feedback gave us kind of more direction on where we need to go as a product and company. So that was kind of the starting point. And then, yeah, we kept iterating, growing the team, going through different funding and venture rounds to eventually kind of land on what we're doing today, which is sitting on top of the largest analytics and BI environments, identifying where there's issues around cost, risk, governance, and offering workflows and automations to start solving these different problems. But yeah, that's kind of the backstory of how we started to where we got to today.
Fab. And it's literally like I say, I think it's that real life application. It's being able to say, okay, I've actually seen this gap in the market here because I've sat in a role and I've recognized that you gave a great example there. I'm really sorry you spent 6 months of hard work building something that was just not relevant. It's not applicable. It's not usable because actually, we've got something else. And I think kind of one of the biggest things that people look for when they're bringing in a new application or a new product or service is that cost versus time, and ultimately, your time is costly. It's expensive. If you can kind of put resource elsewhere, that's great. Never mind all the other benefits that you're getting, kind of when you're looking at this. And I think I want to dive into kind of the main layer here because when we're talking about specifically within security as well, because obviously, when you're looking at business intelligence, there's so much that falls under that. But when you're looking at like the data and the governance side and the risk side, actually, especially when it comes to cybersecurity, so many large enterprises often don't look at the problem until there's already been an incident, until something's already kind of, I suppose, happened. Where do you think there's either some missing intelligence here for companies, or where do you think kind of the gap is for businesses that are, I suppose, probably going to be in need of a product like Datalogz?
Yeah, let me just, I guess, kind of walk through a customer example. I think that could help frame that question. But yeah, so we work with very large organizations. So think of it as companies with a multi-billion dollars in revenue, a lot of publicly traded organizations. And over the last 5 years, they've spent a lot of time, resources, and focus on how do we enable self-service analytics? How do we have people in our organization that are extremely data literate? And so our companies, like, for example, we have a large CPG we're working with right now. They have over 10,000 people producing different analytics, BI, dashboards, and data products. And that's great at first because you're very self-service, you're hitting those data literacy goals. But as you get more and more people interacting with different data reporting tools in these environments, there's an inherent risk to it. Like anytime a human is involved in this, there's a question of, okay, are they using the right data source? Did they create a copy? Did they change who can have access to it? Maybe there was row level security enabled and everyone who saw it was supposed to have it. But if there's copies that are made later on, people can change that. And if it's done outside your central data warehouse, and we saw companies spending millions of dollars on data security and governance at the data layer. But as soon as it hit the BI world, it just became a free for all. We have an insurance client right now where they had a bunch of personal workspaces, or like think of like personal folders where people are making copies of enterprise level reports into their personal environments to change who can have access to it. Like, hey, we don't want to go through the normal approval process, have to submit a ServiceNow ticket. I can just manage my own copy and no one will ask any questions. So we're seeing that this BI layer across the board is like self-service has been great enabled it, but there's this risk that exists. And from kind of a position and marketing perspective is a lot of CISOs are not thinking about this analytics and BI layer today. But in reality, at most organizations, it is the largest access point of enterprise data. Is as soon as it leaves the data warehouse, business users are either consuming it in Excel files via email or in the BI world. And there is an inherent risk there. So our solution is sitting on top of that, monitoring for different risks, duplication, unused assets, odd viewing patterns. We have a company that wants to know every time a report in the US is created and viewed in China. That is a risk they need to enforce. There's legal policy to provide that, and there's no easy enforcement today. And BI at most companies is the Wild West. So we have a point solution that sits on top of it, but exposes where there's problems, risk, and then actually helps solve those across the board. But yeah, does that answer your question on kind of the
Yeah.
framing there?
No, definitely does. And I think kind of it's sometimes it kind of, you look at it and you think, well, this is such an obvious thing. Obviously, you've got, because not only at this point, you've got so many touch points, you've got so many people that are getting access to this information and this data. It almost seems obvious that you're like, of course, there's an inherent risk here, that there's possibilities for breach, or just even kind of that process of how data is being dealt with from, like, say, a GDPR perspective or whatever it could be. And I kind of like what you mentioned when you look at kind of the role of a CISO. in particular is a really holistic role. And sometimes I think it's really easy to have that focus on the specific datas or the specific touch points or access to certain parts of data. But when you look at CISOs or other technology leaders, but there's definitely areas of data that they're overlooking by the sounds of it. I mean, are there any parts where you think, look, this is actually where you're probably the most vulnerable and you're just not realizing that these are like, I suppose, the biggest gaps where you're not kind of getting the visibility or not understanding where, like I say, you potential for vulnerabilities here are much higher than you probably anticipate.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think BI is one of those areas, so business intelligence tools, because the number of people that interact with data in an organization, it is much larger than your data warehouse, a lot of your internal applications, is data is being consumed in BI. And users, if they're able to upload new files there to make copies of things, share it out, is like they need that for self-service and to drive revenue or whatever projects people are working on. But you need guardrails in place. And most companies today, if they're coming to us for a cyber incident or an event, it doesn't happen until there's a critical issue in their environment. For example, we had a company with unionized employees, and someone took a CSV of salary information and uploaded that to Tableau. And anyone with the link in the organization could access it. And people started downloading that information. And it turned out that the union employees were negotiating against the company and they had everyone's salary information as part of that. And it was leaked through BI. So that was a critical breach and incident that was brought to light because this BI layer, there wasn't enforcement of policy, and it's very much managed by that end user. And I'm sure there's other enterprise applications that have the same level of risk, but BI is an area where almost instant connectivity across your warehousing. And theoretically, like everyone should implement best practices and prevent these from happening. But the reality at most enterprises is no one is watching it or controlling it, or it's outsourced through multiple third parties where you have one consulting firm going to another offshore firm to another offshore to manage these systems, and someone just pressing button, grant access, grant access, grant access to these accounts. Like we see at large enterprises, Gmail domains, Yahoo emails, accessing BI reports. We saw someone the other day with over 4,000 users that didn't have an email ID tagged to them that were downloading data from reporting environments. And this is a massive risk. And I guess it's probably one of 1,000 areas a CISO has to think about. But we're offering basically like a light switch, turn on the button and enforce policy there in a very lightweight way. And it is significant risk reduction because you are governing and controlling one of these large access points of data, but without throttling risk and use or self-service there.
Yeah. And I think it's just important sometimes to identify that because it's, again, when it's something that's not necessarily on the usual to-do list or the forefront of the mind, it's really easy to overlook that actually here are additional avenues that we're not potentially looking at or securing. And I think that's always the downside with security, right? Is your people are your biggest asset, but at the same time, they're also your biggest vulnerability. And anything that they're touching is always going to leave you open at some point. Now, I'd be interested to see because obviously, like you mentioned there, you're offering and working with enterprises, you're offering something that is I suppose it's really kind of almost that ease element of being able to say, well, you've got a load of different points here. Let's kind of bring it all together. And I'd be interested to see what are the key solutions that you think that are going to help resolve a lot of these challenges that we're talking about here. Because I think especially when you consider the implementations of like more advanced automated technologies that are also starting to get involved in stuff like this, I think kind of, it can be quite hard to keep up with. So yeah, what do you think some of those key solutions we're going to be looking at are going to be the most valuable?
Yeah, so we're still seeing like at most enterprises that a lot of legacy analytics data tools still exist. So like business objects, Cognos, MicroStrategy. Then there's this kind of, I'd say, maybe the most popular tools that you hear about all the time, Power BI, Tableau, Click. Then there's this next wave of call it like agentic automation, new startups or very well funded companies that also consume data. And we're seeing that enterprises like are trying to standardize and consolidate to fewer tools with business pockets adopting the latest and most modern tools and reporting environments. And I think that's driven from a cost perspective of it's cheaper to have one administration team, have one platform to run across the board versus having 30 different shadow IT departments all have their own procedures, rules in place, and protocol that they have to follow. And I think the big change that we're seeing as well is just every tool, whether it's the call it legacy or heritage or kind of older systems to the very modern ones, is they're all making it so much easier for that business user and data consumer to consume data and produce insights faster. Like what used to take in Power BI 30 days to go, okay, here's your data model, create a report, build your templated dashboard, make edits, add the right filters and slicers, is you can do instantly with a few prompts in Copilot and have a dashboard built in seconds and then edit to your needs in a few minutes. And what this is creating is that the amount of reports, dashboards, data products that are existing across all these different tools is growing like crazy and skyrocketing at most companies. And this, what was been kind of a wild west and not governed today, is becoming even worse just in the number of reports, dashboards, problems, risk, volume that exists in these environments. And so we're seeing that across the board is that this kind of shift to more analytics AI tools is being deployed in small pockets at an enterprise today, but every single technology is incorporating AI, LLM, kind of an agentic approach in some way. And of course, the big players, Microsoft, Salesforce, SAP Data Cloud, they want to dominate and own that where business users consume and make insights. They want to make it so easy. And a lot of that, I think, success factor today for these companies is measured by on the volume of decisions, reports created, but there's so much junk and risk being created that needs enforcement and policy. So I think we're seeing it kind of in a moment of change in the market where it's just becoming so much easier to make data-driven decisions, but that importance for guardrails just keeps increasing. And I think will continue to increase over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting landscape to be in because and I always kind of talk about how rapidly this is evolving at the moment as well. And I think that's just because we're adopting new technology that's helping with things like automation. And I think it's the efficiency piece, but again, it's definitely opening up that kind of, yes, it's creating ease, but like you say, suddenly now it's also making it easier to create loads more reports or whatever it may be. I actually think kind of because what you guys took something interesting, and I think this is kind of really staying relevant on the point of being able to pivot with the market and as things evolve, recognizing that actually here are where the gaps really are. Because I think you guys, your initial strategy was really looking at kind of selling, like the tech data kind of side of things. But now I think kind of you guys have got a lot more alignment with like the CIOs, the CISOs, and kind of with the technology leaders. And I'm curious to kind of see, how is it, because obviously you've had 4 years or so now of being able to almost refine and recognize where you can have the biggest impact. What is it that kind of led you down that path? And I suppose kind of what has been the impact of that kind of shift in strategy?
Mhm. Yeah, we're a startup, so I feel like we're constantly iterating, pivoting, and trying to figure out, okay, what works best, what makes sense. And I don't think we'll ever have a perfect answer, be like, hey, this is the final. But I guess on day one, when we started the company, we were approaching a similar problem in BI, but trying to solve it through search and discovery. So making it very, very easy for an end user to say, hey, I want this report. This is where it lives in your system. And we were able to grow that product, and we got, I'd say, a couple mid-market companies paying us $1,000, $2,000 a month. But then we had this enterprise come to us and say, "Hey, can we use the data that you're producing from this platform to clean up our environment? And we'll pay you more money than all of your other contracts you'll make in the next 2 years." And we're like, "Okay, let's just drop that entire code base and restart completely on this product." And for us, I'd say that was like a very eye-opening moment of saying, okay, this is what a big company, the impact that we can have with our product. And I'd say from there, we pivoted to really creating this BI ops space of how do we keep these analytics environments clean, lean, efficient, risk-free, secure. And then we went out and started selling to, I call it like BI managers, individual BI engineers, IT system admins. And we were able to win several clients and get in front of a few customers that way. But it took us some time to really realize that if we're solving a BI specific problem, the CIO, the CFO, the budget holder may not actually care about it at most enterprise. So what we did a lot of work on over the last kind of year is figuring out how do we take the value that we're producing for these end users and translate it to what executives care about and what will actually impact them to make a decision. And that I'd say is like a combination of, okay, we pivoted our product, but we also pivoted our buyer persona of who we're selling to and how we're selling to them and how we're reaching them. And once we, I think, kind of figured out both of those things, like the number of new customers we've had in the last quarter has been way more than before in terms of just growth quarter over quarter. And I think it's that combination of product market fit, but then also like persona and messaging market fit. That it just takes time in the market to understand your buyer, what they care about, who can spend money, and really what is a hair on fire problem that you'd want to have solved today. So I feel like so many startups, like companies are willing to talk to them, chat with them, but actually getting money, budget, someone to own a procurement cycle that's going to take months, guide you through InfoSec is it has to be something that they really care about and really impacts the bottom line of the company and creates positive ROI, whether that's risk reduction, whether that's cost savings or value creation. And for us, it took a long time, I think, to align all those things. But we really feel like we're at a point where we can go to any Fortune 2000, the Department of Defense in the US, other pieces of the public sector, and can almost always resonate and tie to these value props around, hey, we have too much analytics, we have too many dashboards, data products. How's this going to inform our AI strategy? What's the impact of this in the future? Is it creating risk? And offer a very pinpoint solution with easy deployment and instant ROI for our customers. So that's a little bit about, I'd say, our multiple pivots. And I don't think we're done. I'm sure we'll continue to evolve and change what we're doing. But that's how we got to where we are today.
So, and that's the joy of the startup, right? Isn't it? It's like this refinement piece. It's constantly kind of going back and it's chipping away at the block, kind of looking at them and going, okay, well, actually, let's go in this direction. And I think it's always, it can be a superpower as much as it can kind of, be detrimental, dependent on how you approach change. And I think when you're able to kind of really listen to your customers, and I think this is something I hear all the time about the fact that you can work with startups, you can have the best product in the world, but if you're not actually listening to the right people and understanding like the application that they need kind of in the way that it really needs to help them, then ultimately you're kind of just hitting your head against a roadblock. And Logan, before we close off, what I want to ask is, for anybody, any of our listeners that have kind of been listening today, and maybe they've kind of been going, well, this, okay, you're hitting home a little bit here. Maybe I'm listening, I'm identifying a couple of things that could be a gap in what we're doing or what we have. What would you recommend are the next steps? How can they kind of know that, okay, do we need to take it seriously and look at a product like what you guys are offering here?
Mhm. Yeah. So from a Datalogz perspective, I think any company that has over 2,000 BI assets or data products that exist there is definitely risk. There's probably cost optimization and improvement areas. So I'd say that is kind of our threshold is if you have thousands of data products and hundreds of users in your environment, you're going to have some level of risk and governance. And I'd say just ask internal teams how they're enforcing it today. And if there is no enforcement mechanism, well, a starting point, we offer kind of this assessment that plugs in and tells you instantly where are the gaps, where are there issues, where there's room for optimization. And then on the flip side of that is, I think, just kind of internally understanding how those pieces align and recognize there is a risk in these analytics tools. And a lot of them are measuring KPIs by production, data product production, and you need to enforce policy to make sure that that environment is clean, lean, and risk-free. But yeah, I'd say just starting internally is probably the best spot. And then, of course, we're datalogz.io is our website. Or if you Google anything about BI sprawl, Datalogz, analytics, metadata will probably pull up in those searches as well.
Awesome. No, well, Logan, thank you so much for your time. Honestly, that was an incredible conversation. I think you're a prime example of how blending that deep technical roots with the kind of founder grit that you need to have that agility. It really kind of can turn a personal challenge into an industry wide solution. And to any of our listeners, if you're navigating kind of, BI ops, data mistrust, cost of, the or risk of hidden analytics, make sure to reach out to Logan and the team, because I think ultimately, yeah, it's there's definitely something here that's, I think there'll be plenty of enterprises recognizing that, hey, this is a solution, or this is something that we really need to start considering. But yeah, thank you for joining. And to our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with any of your data or security peers. Make sure to get connected with us. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week for more conversations that's shaping cyber.
Awesome. Thank you very much.